My name is Sophia Hayes, and I'm 28 years old. Standing in this courtroom today, clutching the copy of my grandmother's will that names me the sole heir to her $10 million estate, I never imagined my own parents would be sitting across from me with their lawyer, claiming I'm unfit to inherit what Grandma Evelyn left me. The tension in the room is suffocating as my father Harold leans forward and declares to Judge Patricia Williams something so shocking about my identity that even the seasoned judge stops mid-sentence and asks, "Wait. You're what, ma'am?" Before I tell you how this nightmare began and how I fought back, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? I'd love to know in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories. Trust me, you won't believe what my own flesh and blood put me through to steal my inheritance. So grab something to drink, get comfortable, and let's dive into this incredible journey of betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimately, justice. To understand how I ended up in that courtroom, I need to take you back to where it all started with my grandmother, Evelyn Ashford. While most grandmothers spoiled their grandchildren with cookies and bedtime stories, Grandma Evelyn was different. She was a powerhouse in the real estate industry, owning properties across 3 states and running a multi-million-dollar business empire from her corner office overlooking downtown Chicago. What made our relationship special wasn't the money she had, but the dreams she encouraged me to pursue. From the time I was 12, Grandma Evelyn would take me to her office during summer breaks. While other kids were at camp, I was learning about property valuations, market analysis, and business negotiations. She saw something in me that my parents never did. Where Harold and Dorothy Hayes saw a daughter who should follow their predetermined path of marriage and motherhood, Grandma Evelyn saw a young woman with the potential to build something extraordinary. She would often tell me, "Sophia, never let anyone else dictate your worth or your dreams. You have a brilliant mind for business, and someday you'll show the world what you're capable of." My parents never understood our connection. They tolerated it because Grandma Evelyn's money provided the lifestyle they enjoyed, but they constantly criticized her influence on me. Harold, who worked as a mid-level insurance adjuster, resented that his mother had built something he never could. Dorothy, who had never worked outside the home, was jealous of the attention Grandma gave me instead of focusing on her precious son Timothy, my younger brother who could do no wrong in their eyes. The last time I saw Grandma Evelyn alive was 3 months before she passed. She was 82 but still sharp as a tack, reviewing contracts in her study when I arrived for our monthly dinner. "Sophia," she said, setting down her reading glasses, "I want you to know that everything I built will continue through you. Your parents and Timothy see my business as a piggy bank to break open, but you understand its true value. You'll protect what I've created and make it even better." I thought she was just being sentimental about getting older. I had no idea she was preparing me for what was coming. When the call came on that Tuesday morning in October, my world shattered. Dorothy's voice on the phone was strangely calm as she informed me that Grandma Evelyn had suffered a massive heart attack during the night and passed away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was a blur of relatives I barely knew, business associates paying their respects, and my parents playing the role of grieving son and daughter-in-law while secretly calculating their windfall. 2 weeks later, we gathered in the law office of Robert Chen, Grandma Evelyn's attorney, for the reading of the will. I sat between my parents, expecting to hear about a modest inheritance and perhaps a few sentimental items. Timothy lounged in his chair, already mentally spending his portion on the sports car he'd been wanting. Harold and Dorothy sat forward eagerly, ready to finally get their hands on what they felt they deserved after years of pretending to care about the old woman. Mr. Chen cleared his throat and began reading. "I, Evelyn Margaret Ashford, being of sound mind and body." The legal language droned on until he reached the part that changed everything. "I hereby leave my entire estate, including all real property, business interests, investments, and personal effects, totaling approximately $10 million, to my granddaughter, Sophia Elizabeth Hayes." The silence that followed was deafening. Dorothy's face went white, then red with rage. Harold's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Timothy shot up from his chair, knocking it backward. "That can't be right," he shouted. "Read it again." But Mr. Chin continued, explaining that Grandma Evelyn had been very specific in her instructions. She left small token amounts to Harold, Dorothy, and Timothy, $5,000 each, but everything else came to me. The will had been updated just 6 months before her death, and she had included a personal letter explaining her decision. As Mr. Chen handed me the sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma Evelyn's elegant script, I could feel the hatred radiating from my family. Harold was clenching his fists so tightly his knuckles were white. Dorothy was muttering under her breath about that manipulative old witch and how this had to be some kind of mistake. Timothy was pacing the small office like a caged animal. I opened the letter with trembling hands and read Grandma Evelyn's final words to me. "My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer there to protect you from what's coming next. Your parents and brother will not accept this decision gracefully. They will try everything in their power to take what I'm leaving you, including destroying your reputation and your spirit. But remember what I taught you about standing strong in negotiations. This is the ultimate test of everything you've learned. Don't let them win. The business needs someone who loves it, not someone who just wants to cash it out. I believe in you completely." Looking back, I realized that was the moment my family stopped seeing me as daughter and sister, and started seeing me as an obstacle to be removed. The war for my inheritance was about to begin, and I was completely unprepared for the lengths they would go to destroy me. The attack on my character began just 3 days after the will reading. I should have seen it coming when Dorothy called me with fake concern in her voice, suggesting we talk through this inheritance situation like a family. But I was still naive enough to believe that blood meant something to them. Harold struck first at my workplace. He called my supervisor at Morrison & Associates, the marketing firm where I'd worked for 4 years, and informed him that I was going through a severe mental health crisis related to my grandmother's death. He painted a picture of a grief-stricken young woman who was making irrational decisions and not thinking clearly. He suggested that perhaps I needed time off to get the help I desperately needed. Within hours, I was called into a meeting with HR. My supervisor, Janet Morrison, looked uncomfortable as she explained that they'd received concerning information about my mental state. "Sophia, we want to support you through this difficult time," she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "Perhaps you should consider taking a leave of absence to deal with your grandmother's estate and get yourself sorted out." I tried to explain that I was perfectly fine, that my family was upset about the will and was retaliating, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. Harold had been convincing. He'd played the role of the worried father perfectly, expressing concern about my sudden personality changes and erratic behavior since learning about the inheritance. Meanwhile, Dorothy launched her own campaign in our neighborhood and among family friends. She positioned herself as the heartbroken mother whose daughter had somehow manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman. At the grocery store, at church, at every social gathering, Dorothy would tearfully explain how Grandma Evelyn had obviously been influenced during her final months. "Poor Evelyn," Dorothy would say, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "She was getting so forgetful near the end." Sophia spent so much time alone with her, filling her head with ideas about business and independence. I think Sophia took advantage of her grandmother's confusion to rewrite that will. It's just not like Mother Evelyn to cut out her own son like that. The whispers followed me everywhere. Suddenly, people who had known me my entire life were looking at me with suspicion. Mrs. Patterson from down the street, who used to wave cheerfully when I visited my parents, now crossed to the other side of the road when she saw me coming. Former family friends stopped returning my calls. Timothy played his role as the devastated younger brother perfectly. He told anyone who would listen that I had always been jealous of Grandma Evelyn's success and had manipulated her by pretending to be interested in business. Sophia never cared about real estate before Grandma got sick, he would lie convincingly. She just saw dollar signs and took advantage of an old woman who wasn't thinking straight anymore. But their most damaging move was hiring Jonathan Blackwell, one of the most expensive estate lawyers in the city. Within a week of the will reading, I received official legal papers challenging the validity of Grandma Evelyn's will. The document claimed that my grandmother had been suffering from diminished mental capacity and had been unduly influenced by an interested party, meaning me. The allegations were devastating to read. According to their legal filing, I had systematically isolated Grandma Evelyn from her family, manipulated her into changing her will, and exploited her emotional vulnerability following her husband's death years earlier. They claimed that the original will, which supposedly left everything equally to Harold and his children, represented her true intentions before I corrupted her judgment. They demanded that the court set aside the current will and distribute the estate according to what they claimed were Grandma Evelyn's real wishes. Reading those legal papers felt like being punched in the stomach. Every moment I'd spent with my grandmother, every conversation about business, every piece of advice she'd given me was now being twisted into evidence of manipulation and elder abuse. The worst part was how believable they made it sound. On paper, it did look suspicious that a 28-year-old granddaughter would inherit everything while the devoted son received almost nothing. They painted me as a calculating young woman who had preyed on a lonely widow, gradually convincing her to cut her own family out of her will. Within 2 weeks, the damage to my reputation was substantial. Colleagues at work began treating me differently, clients started requesting different account managers, and I could feel the judgment everywhere I went. Harold and Dorothy had successfully planted seeds of doubt about my character, my mental state, and my relationship with Grandma Evelyn. But this was only the beginning. As I would soon discover, character assassination was just their opening move in a much more elaborate and vicious campaign to destroy my life and steal my inheritance. They were willing to go much further than I ever imagined possible, and the worst was yet to come. With my character already under attack, my parents escalated their campaign to a level that left me reeling. Harold, who had always been methodical in his insurance work, approached the destruction of my life with the same systematic precision he used to investigate claims. Dorothy, meanwhile, proved to be a master manipulator, using her maternal image to make their lies more believable. The next blow came when Harold contacted Morrison and Associates again, this time armed with evidence of my instability. He brought them printed emails that he claimed I had sent him, filled with erratic ramblings about family conspiracies and paranoid accusations. Of course, these emails were completely fabricated, but they looked convincing enough to support his narrative of a daughter in crisis. "I'm really worried about Sophia," Harold told Janet Morrison during a face-to-face meeting he requested. "She's been sending these disturbing messages to family members, accusing us of trying to steal from her. Last week she showed up at our house at 2 a.m, demanding to search through her grandmother's old papers. My wife Dorothy is actually afraid of her now." The lies were so detailed and delivered with such apparent anguish that Janet was completely convinced. When I arrived at work the next Monday, I was called into an emergency meeting. "Sophia," Janet began carefully, "we've received some very concerning information about your behavior outside of work, combined with the performance issues we've been noticing lately." "What performance issues?" I interrupted, shocked. My work had been excellent, if anything better than usual, as I threw myself into projects to distract from the family drama. "You've seemed distracted, unfocused," Janet continued, clearly uncomfortable but determined to proceed. "Several clients have mentioned feeling like you weren't fully present during meetings. And now with these personal issues affecting your family relationships, we think it's best if you take an extended leave of absence to get the help you need." I tried to defend myself, to explain that my family was deliberately sabotaging me because of the inheritance dispute, but I could see it was hopeless. In their minds, my protest just confirmed what Harold had told them about my paranoid accusations and victim mentality. Within an hour, I was escorted from the building with a box of my personal belongings, officially on indefinite medical leave pending a psychological evaluation. For years of building my career had been destroyed in less than a month. But Harold and Dorothy weren't finished. They began calling my clients directly, expressing concern about my mental state and suggesting they might want to work with other account representatives. "We just want to make sure Sophia gets the help she needs," Dorothy would say in her most caring voice. "She's been under such tremendous stress since her grandmother passed, and we're worried she might not be able to give your account the attention it deserves right now." These calls were devastating. Within days, 3 major clients had requested transfers to other agents. Word spread quickly through the small business community where I'd built my reputation, and soon potential clients were specifically asking not to work with me. Timothy contributed to the campaign by targeting my social media presence. He somehow gained access to my Facebook account and began posting erratic, emotional messages about family betrayal and inheritance theft. To anyone reading them, these posts made me look unstable and vindictive. When friends reached out expressing concern, Timothy would respond as me with even more disturbing messages, effectively burning bridges I didn't even know were on fire. The most heartbreaking part was watching my social circle shrink. Dorothy made sure to attend every church service, every community event, every place where she could spread her version of events. She would approach mutual friends with tears in her eyes, explaining how difficult this situation was for the family. "We just don't know what to do about Sophia," she would confide to my friend Kelly after church. "She's become so angry and bitter since Mother Evelyn passed. The inheritance has completely changed her. She actually accused Harold and me of trying to steal from her own grandmother. Can you imagine? We loved that woman like she was our own mother." Dorothy's performance was masterful. She never directly said I was lying or mentally ill, but she painted a picture of a family in crisis, dealing with a daughter who had lost her way after coming into sudden wealth. The implication was clear: grief and greed had corrupted me, turning me against the very people who loved me most. My friend circle began to fracture. People stopped inviting me to social gatherings. Phone calls went unreturned. When I ran into acquaintances around town, conversations became awkward and brief. Some people clearly believed my family's version of events, while others simply didn't want to get involved in what they saw as a messy family dispute. The isolation was crushing. Within 6 weeks of Grandma Evelyn's death, I had lost my job, my professional reputation, most of my social connections, and my sense of stability. Every day brought new evidence of how thoroughly my parents had poisoned every aspect of my life. But perhaps the cruelest blow was yet to come. Harold and Dorothy weren't just destroying my present, they were systematically erasing my past and future. Their next moves would target the very foundation of my identity and the relationships I treasured most. And the worst part was, I still had no idea how deep their betrayal would ultimately go. With my career and reputation in ruins, Harold escalated to financial warfare with the calculated precision of someone who had planned every move. His background in insurance had taught him exactly how to manipulate systems and documentation, skills he now turned against his own daughter with terrifying effectiveness. The first sign of trouble came when I tried to access the joint checking account that Grandma Evelyn had established for estate-related expenses. She had added me as a signatory 6 months before her death, intending for me to handle immediate costs like funeral expenses and property maintenance while the will went through probate. When I attempted to withdraw money to pay the property taxes on Grandma's downtown office building, I discovered the account had been frozen. Harold had contacted the bank, claiming that I was emotionally unstable and making unauthorized withdrawals from an elderly woman's account. He presented them with a notarized letter, supposedly from Grandma Evelyn, expressing concern about my erratic behavior and requesting that all account activity be suspended pending a family review. The letter was a complete forgery, but Harold's insurance background had taught him exactly how to create convincing documentation. "I'm sorry, Miss Hayes," the bank manager explained when I demanded answers. "We received some very serious allegations about potential elder abuse and financial exploitation. Until this matter is resolved through proper legal channels, we have to protect the account from any questionable activity." The timing was devastating. Property taxes were due within 30 days, and without access to the estate funds, I would have to pay them from my own savings or risk losing one of Grandma Evelyn's most valuable properties. Harold knew exactly what he was doing, forcing me to drain my personal finances while making it look like I was the one mismanaging estate assets. But the frozen bank account was just the beginning. Dorothy had been busy forging documents that would support their legal challenge to the will. She created fake medical records suggesting that Grandma Evelyn had been showing signs of dementia in her final months. Using letterhead stolen from Dr. Martin Wheeler's office, where Grandma had been a patient, Dorothy fabricated reports documenting increasing confusion and impaired decision-making capacity. The forged medical records were sophisticated enough to fool a casual review. Dorothy had researched dementia symptoms online and created a convincing progression of cognitive decline that supposedly occurred during the exact time period when Grandma Evelyn updated her will. According to these fake documents, my grandmother had been experiencing short-term memory loss, difficulty concentrating, and increased susceptibility to outside influence precisely when she decided to leave everything to me. Timothy's contribution to this phase was perhaps the most sophisticated of their schemes. Using his computer skills, he created an elaborate trail of fake email correspondence between Grandma Evelyn and me. These emails, which he backdated to appear authentic, showed a young woman gradually manipulating a confused elderly relative into changing her will. In Timothy's fabricated emails, Grandma Evelyn expressed confusion about her finances and repeatedly asked for my help understanding her investments. The fake correspondence showed me responding with increasingly controlling language, offering to handle everything for her and suggesting that her son Harold didn't really understand business the way I did. The most damaging fake email thread involved supposed conversations about the will itself. In Timothy's fiction, Grandma Evelyn worried that Harold and Dorothy only cared about money, while I convinced her that leaving everything to me was the only way to preserve her legacy. The emails were crafted to make me look like a manipulative predator who had systematically isolated my grandmother from her family while convincing her to disinherit her own son. These forged documents formed the backbone of their legal challenge. Jonathan Blackwell filed a comprehensive motion to invalidate the will, supported by what appeared to be compelling medical evidence of diminished capacity and email proof of undue influence. The case they built was so convincing that even I began to doubt myself when I read through their evidence. Meanwhile, Harold used his connections in the insurance industry to make my life even more difficult. He contacted my car insurance company, claiming that I had been involved in several recent incidents that demonstrated increasingly erratic behavior. Though no such incidents had occurred, his professional reputation in the industry gave weight to his concerns, and my insurance rates skyrocketed. He also reported me to the credit bureaus for suspicious financial activity, claiming that I had been making unusual large purchases and displaying signs of financial instability since coming into the inheritance. These reports damaged my credit score and made it nearly impossible for me to qualify for loans or even rent an apartment. The most crushing blow came when I discovered that Harold had filed a police report claiming I had threatened him during a family confrontation that never happened. According to his fictional account, I had become violently angry when confronted about my treatment of Grandma Evelyn and had made vague but menacing threats about what would happen if anyone tried to steal what was rightfully mine. The police report created an official record of my supposed instability and violent tendencies. While no charges were filed due to lack of evidence, the existence of the report itself became another weapon they could use to demonstrate my unfitness to handle a large inheritance. Within 3 months of Grandma Evelyn's death, Harold and Dorothy had constructed an elaborate fortress of lies that seemed almost impossible to tear down. They had documentation supporting every aspect of their narrative, medical records proving diminished capacity, emails demonstrating manipulation, financial records suggesting exploitation, and police reports indicating violent tendencies. As I sat in my apartment, surrounded by legal paperwork and faced with mounting bills I could no longer pay, I realized that my parents had been planning this campaign for longer than I had imagined. Every move was too calculated, too sophisticated to be improvised. They had been preparing to steal my inheritance from the moment they learned about Grandma Evelyn's decision, and they had left nothing to chance. But their greatest betrayal was yet to come. Soon I would discover that they had recruited someone I trusted completely to help destroy me from the inside. The next phase of their attack would target my heart as ruthlessly as they had targeted my reputation and finances. Just when I thought my parents had exhausted their capacity for cruelty, they unveiled their most devastating weapon, my best friend Linda Martinez. Linda had been my closest confidant since our sophomore year at Northwestern University, the person I had shared my deepest fears and dreams with for over a decade. She was the maid of honor I had chosen for a wedding that never happened, the godmother I had planned to name for children I hoped to have someday, the sister I had never had by blood but had chosen by heart. When Linda called me that Thursday evening in November, her voice thick with emotion, I assumed she was reaching out to comfort me during what she knew was the worst period of my life. "Sophia, honey," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice, "I need to see you. There's something important we need to talk about." We met at Café Luna, the little coffee shop near campus where we had spent countless hours studying and dreaming about our futures. Linda looked terrible, her usual bright demeanor replaced by an expression I had never seen before. Her hand shook as she stirred her latte, unable to meet my eyes. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambient cafe noise. For a moment, I thought she was going to confess some personal crisis and offer me a break from my own problems to help her through whatever was happening. Instead, she destroyed my world with her next words. "Sophia, I've been working with your parents for the past 2 months. They paid me $25,000 to gather information about you and testify against you in the will contest." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her in disbelief, waiting for her to tell me this was some kind of sick joke. But the guilt written across her face confirmed that every word was true. "They approached me right after the funeral," Linda continued, tears now flowing freely. "Your dad said you were having some kind of breakdown and that they were worried about you. He said you had always been fragile, and that coming into all that money so suddenly was making you paranoid and unstable." I found my voice, though it came out as barely a croak. "And you believed him?" "They had evidence, Sophia. Medical records showing your grandmother was confused. Emails between you two that seemed manipulative. Your dad showed me bank statements suggesting you had been taking money from her accounts. They made it seem like you were the one lying, like you had manipulated that poor old woman into changing her will." The betrayal cut deeper than anything my parents had done. They were blood relatives acting out of greed, but Linda was supposed to be my chosen family, the person who knew me well enough to see through any deception. Yet she had been turned against me just as easily as everyone else. "What did you tell them?" I asked, dreading the answer. Linda's confession unfolded like a nightmare. For 2 months, she had been reporting every conversation we had to my parents. When I confided my fears about the legal challenge, Linda had passed that information along, allowing Harold and Dorothy to anticipate my moves. When I shared my financial struggles after losing my job, they used that intel to time their attacks for maximum damage. But worse than the spying was what Linda had agreed to do in court. She was prepared to testify that I had changed dramatically in recent years, becoming obsessed with money and resentful of my family's financial situation. She would tell the judge that I had frequently complained about my parents' failures and expressed envy of Grandma Evelyn's success. Most damaging of all, Linda was going to claim that I had explicitly discussed ways to get closer to my grandmother and had mentioned that the old woman was getting confused and might be easier to influence as she aged. None of these conversations had ever happened, but Linda's testimony would come from someone the court would see as a disinterested third party with no financial stake in the outcome. "They coached me on exactly what to say," Linda admitted, her voice breaking. "They had me practice the testimony over and over until it sounded natural. They said I would be helping you get the psychiatric care you obviously needed, that letting you keep all that money would just enable your delusions and make you worse." As Linda detailed the extent of her betrayal, I realized how thoroughly my parents had poisoned every relationship I treasured. They hadn't just attacked my reputation and finances, they had turned my closest friend into a weapon against me. The personal conversations, private fears, and intimate details that I had shared with Linda in confidence were now ammunition for their legal case. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. "Because I saw the medical records they filed with the court," Linda said, wiping her nose with a crumpled tissue. "I know your grandmother, Sophia. I spent Christmas dinners with her. I watched her play cards with us just 3 months before she died. She was sharp as a tack. Those medical records claiming she was confused and forgetful? They're fake. Your parents forged them. Linda explained how she had compared the letterhead on the forged medical records to genuine documents from Dr. Wheeler's office and discovered inconsistencies in the formatting. When she confronted Harold about the discrepancies, he had tried to dismiss her concerns, but his reaction convinced her that she was being used to support a fabricated case. I realized they weren't trying to get you help, Sophia. They were trying to destroy you. And I helped them do it. Linda's voice was heavy with shame and regret. I'm so sorry. I thought I was being a good friend by protecting you from yourself, but I was just their puppet. The revelation that Linda had discovered the truth about the forged documents was shocking, but it also gave me the first ray of hope I had felt in months. If she was willing to recant her testimony and expose the lies, maybe I had a chance to fight back. But Linda's next words shattered that hope. I can't testify for you, Sophia. They made me sign a contract. If I back out or change my story, I have to return the $25,000 plus interest and penalties. I don't have that kind of money. My student loans, my credit card debt. I used their payment to get caught up on everything. I'm trapped. As I sat there listening to my best friend explain how she had sold our friendship for the price of her debts, I felt something fundamental break inside me. The woman I had trusted more than anyone else in the world had been systematically betraying me for money. Every tear I had shed on her shoulder, every fear I had shared, every moment of vulnerability had been recorded and reported back to the people trying to destroy me. Linda left that night promising to try to find a way to help me, but we both knew it was over. Our friendship had been murdered by my parents' greed and her own financial desperation. As I watched her walk away, I realized I was truly alone in this fight. The next morning, I woke up to discover that Timothy had shared photos on social media from our coffee meeting, along with a caption suggesting that I was manipulating another vulnerable person and trying to get Linda to lie for me in court. Even my attempt to reclaim one honest relationship had been twisted into evidence of my supposed predatory nature. That was the moment I hit rock bottom. Sitting in my empty apartment, surrounded by legal documents and bills I couldn't pay, with no job, no friends, and no family support, I seriously considered giving up. Maybe it would be easier to just walk away, let them have the money, and try to rebuild my life somewhere else with a new identity. But then I remembered Grandma Evelyn's letter, still tucked away in my jewelry box. She had warned me this would happen. She had prepared me for this fight. And somewhere in her words, I found the strength to get up and keep fighting. Because if I gave up now, I wouldn't just be losing my inheritance. I would be letting Harold and Dorothy destroy everything that Grandma Evelyn had worked her entire life to build. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. By December, I had reached the lowest point of my life. The combination of legal fees, living expenses, and property taxes on Grandma Evelyn's estate had drained my savings to almost nothing. I was living in a studio apartment in a rough neighborhood, surviving on ramen noodles and generic cereal, watching everything I had worked for crumble while my parents systematically dismantled my existence. The latest blow had come in the form of another lawsuit. Harold and Dorothy were now suing me personally for emotional distress and defamation, claiming that my false accusations about their motives had damaged their reputations in the community. They were seeking $50,000 in damages, money I didn't have and couldn't possibly raise. The irony was suffocating. They had spent months destroying my reputation, my career, and my relationships, but now they were playing the victims, claiming that my attempts to defend myself were actually attacks on their character. Their lawyer, Jonathan Blackwell, had crafted the lawsuit to make me look like a vindictive daughter who was lashing out at loving parents who were only trying to protect their family's interests. I spent Christmas alone in my apartment, staring at the pile of legal documents that covered my kitchen table like some twisted holiday decoration. My phone hadn't rung in days. The few friends who hadn't completely cut me off were maintaining careful distance, unwilling to get involved in what everyone saw as a messy family dispute. Even my former colleagues at Morrison and Associates seemed to cross the street when they saw me around town. The depression was overwhelming. Some mornings, I couldn't find the energy to get out of bed. I would lie there thinking about how completely my parents had outmaneuvered me, how thoroughly they had convinced everyone that I was the villain in this story. They had played their roles perfectly, the grieving son and daughter-in-law who just wanted to honor the true wishes of a beloved mother, forced to take painful legal action against a daughter who had lost her way. It was during one of these dark mornings in early January that I received a call from Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who had been Grandma Evelyn's housekeeper for the past 15 years. Her voice was hesitant when I answered, as if she wasn't sure she should be calling. "Miss Sophia," she said carefully, "I know you've been having some family troubles, but there's something I think you should know about. I've been cleaning out your grandmother's personal effects like the lawyers asked, and I found something hidden in her bedroom that I think she meant for you to have." Mrs. Henderson explained that while packing up Grandma Evelyn's clothes, she had discovered a loose floorboard under the antique dresser. Beneath it was a metal lockbox that contained papers and other items that weren't part of the official estate inventory. "Your grandmother was very particular about her privacy, Mrs. Henderson continued. She told me once that there were some family matters that needed to stay between certain people, if you know what I mean. I think whatever's in that box was meant to stay hidden until the right time." Hope fluttered in my chest for the first time in months. I arranged to meet Mrs. Henderson that afternoon at Grandma Evelyn's house, which had been sitting empty while the will contest dragged through the courts. The once vibrant home felt cold and hollow, filled with dust-covered furniture and the lingering scent of Grandma's favorite lavender perfume. Mrs. Henderson led me upstairs to the master bedroom and showed me the hiding place. The lockbox was small but heavy, secured with a combination lock. Taped to the top was an envelope with my name written in Grandma Evelyn's distinctive handwriting, along with a note, "For Sophia's eyes only, the combination is your birthday." My hand shook as I entered the numbers, March 15, 1996. The lock clicked open, and I lifted the lid to discover a treasure trove that would change everything. The first item I pulled out was a leather journal filled with Grandma Evelyn's careful notes documenting years of suspicious behavior from Harold and Dorothy. She had been tracking their financial requests, recording their complaints about her wasteful spending on charity, and noting their increasingly frequent questions about her will and estate planning. One entry from 2 years ago made my blood run cold. Harold asked again today about my final wishes and seemed irritated when I wouldn't give him specifics about the will. Dorothy made several comments about how Sophia monopolizes my time and suggested I should be spending more time with Timothy instead. I'm beginning to suspect they're planning something. As I read through the journal, I realized that Grandma Evelyn had been documenting a pattern of manipulation that went back much further than I had imagined. Harold had been borrowing money from her for years, small amounts that he never repaid, always with sob stories about unexpected expenses or investment opportunities that fell through. Dorothy had been systematically criticizing my relationship with Grandma, planting seeds of doubt about my motives while positioning Timothy as the more deserving grandchild. But the journal was just the beginning. The lockbox also contained photocopies of bank statements showing that Harold had been forging Grandma Evelyn's signature on checks for months before her death. The amounts were carefully calculated to stay below the thresholds that would trigger bank notification, but they added up to over $30,000 in unauthorized withdrawals. Even more damaging were the printed emails between Harold and Dorothy discussing their plans to challenge the will. These weren't the fake emails that Timothy had created to frame me, these were real communications between my parents, plotting their strategy months before Grandma Evelyn's death. In one email dated just 6 weeks before Grandma passed away, Dorothy had written, "Harold, we need to be more aggressive about this. The old woman is completely under Sophia's spell, and if something happens to her, we could lose everything we've worked for. Maybe it's time to start documenting some of Sophia's concerning behavior so we have ammunition if we need it." Harold's response was even more chilling, "I've already started building a case file. I've got contacts at the bank who can help us freeze assets if necessary, and I know which doctors would be willing to provide the kind of medical opinions we might need. Don't worry, Dorothy. If Evelyn tries to cut us out, we'll prove that Sophia manipulated her into it. But the most explosive item in the lockbox was a small digital recorder containing a conversation between Harold and Dorothy that Grandma Evelyn had secretly recorded just 2 months before her death. In the recording, my parents discussed their plan to have Grandma declared incompetent so they could take control of her finances while she was still alive. "The key is to make it look like she's losing her memory," Harold's voice said clearly through the recorder's tiny speaker. "I can get documentation showing cognitive decline, and Dorothy can start telling people about incidents of confusion. If we do this right, we can get guardianship and control the money long before she dies." "What about Sophia?" Dorothy's voice asked. "We'll deal with Sophia when the time comes. She's naive and trusting. She won't see it coming until it's too late." As I listened to my parents discussing the systematic destruction of an 80-year-old woman's autonomy, I felt a rage unlike anything I had ever experienced. They hadn't just been planning to steal my inheritance, they had been preparing to rob Grandma Evelyn of her dignity and independence in her final years. The final item in the box was a letter addressed to me, dated just 1 week before Grandma Evelyn's death. In it, she explained that she had been gathering evidence against Harold and Dorothy for months because she suspected they would challenge her will. "My darling Sophia," the letter read, "if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true and Harold and Dorothy are trying to steal what I've left you. I've spent the last year documenting their true nature, and I've seen the greed and cruelty that you, in your loving innocence, never recognized. Use this evidence to protect yourself and honor my wishes. Don't let them win." Sitting on the floor of Grandma Evelyn's bedroom, surrounded by evidence of my parents' calculated betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. The depression and helplessness that had consumed me for months began to transform into something harder and more focused: determination. My grandmother had given me the weapons I needed to fight back. She had anticipated every move my parents would make and had prepared for this battle from beyond the grave. All I had to do now was find the courage to use what she had left me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just defending myself. I was going on the attack. And Harold and Dorothy had no idea what was coming for them. Armed with Grandma Evelyn's evidence, I knew I needed professional help to turn the tide of this battle. The problem was finding a lawyer willing to take on a case against Jonathan Blackwell, one of the city's most powerful estate attorneys, especially when I could barely afford rent, let alone legal fees. After days of calling law offices and being turned away due to conflict of interests or fee requirements, I finally reached Elena Rodriguez at Rodriguez and Associates. Elena specialized in inheritance disputes and had a reputation for taking on David versus Goliath cases. When I explained my situation, she agreed to meet with me on a contingency basis, meaning she would only get paid if we won. Elena's office was a modest space in a converted Victorian house, a far cry from Jonathan Blackwell's marble and mahogany suite downtown. But when I spread out Grandma Evelyn's evidence across her conference table, Elena's eyes lit up with the intensity of a prosecutor who had just been handed a smoking gun. "This changes everything," Elena said, carefully examining the bank statements showing Harold's forged signatures. "Financial fraud, conspiracy, perjury, document forgery, your parents have committed multiple felonies. And this recording?" She held up the digital device containing Harold and Dorothy's conversation about having Grandma declared incompetent. "This is pure gold. It proves premeditation and shows their real motive." Elena explained that the evidence didn't just defend against my parents' claims, it gave us grounds for a devastating counterattack. We could file criminal charges for fraud and forgery, pursue civil damages for the money Harold had stolen, and most importantly, expose their entire conspiracy to the court handling the will contest. But Elena also warned me that my parents wouldn't go down without a fight. "Once they realize what you have, they're going to get desperate," she cautioned. "Desperate people do dangerous things. You need to be prepared for them to escalate even further." Elena was right. Over the next several weeks, as we prepared our counteroffensive, I had to learn to think like my enemies. I began carrying a digital recorder of my own, documenting every interaction with my family. I changed my phone number and email address, routing all communication through Elena's office. I even moved to a new apartment using a friend's name on the lease, creating distance between myself and any potential retaliation. The most important thing Elena taught me was patience. "We're going to let them think they're winning right up until the moment we destroy them," she explained. "Jonathan Blackwell is confident because he thinks he has all the evidence on his side. Let's keep it that way until we're ready to show our hand." While Elena worked on the legal strategy, I focused on understanding my enemies. I studied Harold's insurance background, learning about his investigative techniques and his professional network. I researched Dorothy's social connections, mapping out how she had spread rumors about me throughout the community. I even looked into Timothy's computer skills, discovering that he had been more sophisticated in his manipulation than I had initially realized. This research revealed troubling information about my family that I had been blind to for years. Harold had been fired from his previous job for falsifying insurance claims, a fact he had hidden from everyone including Dorothy. His current position was actually a step down from where he had been 5 years earlier, and their financial situation was much more precarious than they let on. Dorothy's background check revealed that she had been married before Harold, a fact she had never mentioned to anyone in our extended family. Her first marriage had ended in a bitter divorce involving accusations of emotional manipulation and financial impropriety. The pattern of behavior I was experiencing wasn't new. It was how Dorothy operated in relationships when money was involved. Timothy's online activities were perhaps the most disturbing discovery. His social media profiles, which I had never bothered to examine closely, revealed a young man obsessed with wealth and status, frequently posting rants about people who don't deserve what they have and family members who get special treatment. He had been documenting what he saw as my unfair relationship with Grandma Evelyn for years, building resentment that had finally found an outlet in this inheritance battle. As I learned more about my family's true nature, I realized that Grandma Evelyn had been protecting me from this reality my entire life. She had seen through their facades and had been quietly documenting their behavior because she knew this day would come. Her decision to leave everything to me wasn't just about rewarding my business interests, it was about protecting her legacy from people who would destroy it for quick profit. Elena and I spent weeks crafting our strategy. We would wait until Jonathan Blackwell had fully committed to his case, letting him file all of his motions and present his evidence to the court. Then, just before the hearing on the will contest, we would reveal everything at once. The forged medical records, the fake emails, the stolen money, the recorded conspiracy, all of it would come out simultaneously, creating a devastating avalanche of evidence that would destroy their credibility completely. But our preparation went beyond just legal strategy. Elena connected me with a private investigator named Marcus Thompson who specialized in white-collar crime. Marcus helped me verify the financial fraud and trace the money Harold had stolen through various accounts. He also discovered that Linda Martinez had not been the only person my parents had bribed for testimony. They had paid several other acquaintances smaller amounts to make statements about my supposed instability. The investigation revealed the full scope of their conspiracy. Harold and Dorothy had been planning this campaign for over a year, building files of fabricated evidence and recruiting allies who would support their version of events. They had created a shadow version of reality where I was the villain and they were the victims, and they had been so thorough in their preparation that even I had begun to doubt my own memories. As February turned into March, I felt myself transforming. The naive young woman who had trusted her family's love unconditionally was gone, replaced by someone harder and more calculating. I was learning to play their game, to think several moves ahead, to anticipate their strategies and prepare countermoves. The most difficult part of this transformation was letting go of the daughter who still hoped for reconciliation. Every day, I had to make the conscious choice to see Harold and Dorothy as adversaries rather than parents. I had to accept that they had never truly loved me, that I had been nothing more than an obstacle to be removed when my usefulness expired. But with that painful acceptance came clarity and strength. I was no longer fighting to preserve relationships that had never been real. I was fighting to honor Grandma Evelyn's memory and to protect what she had built from people who saw it only as a pile of money to be divided. Elena scheduled our court date for late March, just before the statute of limitations would have expired on some of the fraud charges. Jonathan Blackwell, confident in his manufactured evidence, agreed to the timeline, eager to get the will overturned and his clients paid. As the hearing approached, I felt a calm determination settle over me. Harold and Dorothy had taught me painful lessons about the nature of family, loyalty, and trust. But they had also given me something invaluable: the knowledge that I was strong enough to stand alone when necessary. They were about to learn that the granddaughter they had tried to destroy had become a formidable opponent, armed not just with evidence of their crimes, but with the wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal and emerging stronger on the other side. The final battle was about to begin, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I knew I was going to win. The morning of March 28 dawned gray and cold, matching my mood as Elena and I walked up the courthouse steps. After months of preparation, everything would be decided in the next few hours. Harold and Dorothy sat with Jonathan Blackwell at the plaintiff's table, looking confident and composed. They had dressed carefully for the occasion. Harold in his best suit, projecting the image of a responsible businessman concerned about his family's welfare, Dorothy in conservative navy blue with just enough jewelry to suggest respectability without ostentation. Timothy sat in the gallery behind them, along with several character witnesses they had recruited to testify about my supposed instability. I recognized some faces from our church and neighborhood, people who had known me my entire life but had been convinced by my parents' campaign of lies. Judge Patricia Williams called the court to order, and Jonathan Blackwell began his presentation with theatrical confidence. He painted a picture of a vulnerable elderly woman who had been systematically manipulated by a granddaughter she trusted. Using the forged medical records, fabricated emails, and Linda's prepared testimony, he built what seemed like an ironclad case for undue influence and diminished capacity. "Your Honor," Blackwell intoned in his commanding courtroom voice, "the evidence will show that Evelyn Ashford was suffering from significant cognitive decline in her final months, making her susceptible to manipulation by someone she believed had her best interests at heart. Sophia Hayes took advantage of her grandmother's confusion and isolation to poison her against her own son and ultimately convince her to change a will that had previously provided fairly for all family members. Linda took the stand first, and her performance was flawless. She spoke with apparent reluctance about my supposed changes in personality, my alleged obsession with money, and conversations we had never actually had about influencing Grandma Evelyn. To anyone listening, she sounded like a concerned friend who had witnessed disturbing behavior but had been too loyal to speak up until now. Harold followed, playing his role as the grieving son perfectly. He testified about his mother's increasing confusion, his concern about her relationship with me, and his growing suspicions that something was wrong. His voice cracked with apparent emotion as he described finding out about the changed will and realizing that his mother had been taken advantage of in her vulnerable state. "I loved my mother dearly, Your Honor," Harold said, dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. "She raised me to be honest and hardworking, to treat family as sacred. It breaks my heart to see how she was manipulated in her final months by someone she trusted completely." Dorothy's testimony was equally compelling. She spoke about my grandmother's supposed memory lapses, episodes of confusion that I allegedly concealed from the rest of the family, and conversations where Evelyn had seemed not quite herself. According to Dorothy's fiction, she had tried multiple times to spend more time with Evelyn, only to be blocked by me. Sophia became very protective of Mother Evelyn's time, Dorothy testified tearfully. Whenever Harold and I suggested family gatherings or visits, Sophia would say that Grandma was too tired or too busy. We respected what we thought were legitimate boundaries, but now we realized Sophia was isolating her from anyone who might have noticed her declining condition. As the morning progressed, I watched Jonathan Blackwell systematically destroy my character and my relationship with Grandma Evelyn. Every piece of fabricated evidence was presented with courtroom precision, every lie delivered with apparent sincerity. To any observer, their case seemed overwhelming. Then came the moment that would change everything. Harold was back on the stand for cross-examination when Elena asked him to clarify his earlier testimony about my inappropriate relationship with Grandma Evelyn. Mr. Hayes, you've suggested that your daughter somehow manipulated your mother into changing her will. Can you be more specific about what made this manipulation possible? Harold leaned forward, his confidence evident as he prepared to deliver what he thought would be the final blow. Your Honor, my daughter Sophia is a lesbian. She's never been in a normal, stable relationship with a man. My mother was from a different generation, and she found Sophia's lifestyle disturbing. Sophia took advantage of my mother's confusion about this issue to convince her that Harold and I were judgmental and prejudiced, while she was the only one who truly understood and accepted Mother Evelyn. The courtroom fell silent as Harold continued his character assassination. Sophia used my mother's natural kindness and her unfamiliarity with alternative lifestyles to position herself as the victim of family discrimination. She convinced a confused elderly woman that leaving her entire estate to Sophia was somehow a statement about tolerance and acceptance. Dorothy nodded emphatically from her seat, clearly pleased with Harold's performance. Timothy smirked from the gallery, believing they had just delivered the decisive blow that would destroy any sympathy I might have had from the court. But then Judge Patricia Williams spoke, and her voice carried a tone that made everyone in the courtroom freeze. Wait. You're discriminating based on sexual orientation, ma'am? Judge Williams said, her eyes focusing sharply on Dorothy, who had been nodding along enthusiastically with Harold's testimony. The judge's reaction was not what my parents had expected. Judge Williams was known throughout the legal community as a fair and impartial jurist, but she was also openly gay, having been in a committed relationship with her partner for over 15 years. Harold and Dorothy had clearly not done their research before making their sexual orientation the centerpiece of their attack on my character. Mr. Hayes, Judge Williams continued, her voice growing colder, are you seriously suggesting to this court that your mother's decision to leave her estate to her granddaughter was somehow influenced by the granddaughter's sexual orientation? And that this sexual orientation makes her unfit to inherit? Harold's face went white as he realized his mistake. Jonathan Blackwell was frantically scribbling notes, clearly trying to figure out how to recover from this disastrous line of testimony. Your Honor, Harold stammered, I didn't mean to suggest. I was just explaining the family dynamics that Sophia exploited. The family dynamics where you and your wife were prejudiced against your daughter's sexual orientation? Judge Williams asked sharply. Is that the dynamic you're referring to? Elena rose smoothly from her seat. Your Honor, if I may, this revelation about the Hayes family's discriminatory attitudes actually provides important context for the evidence we're about to present. And with that, Elena began our counterattack. She presented the lockbox contents methodically. The journal documenting years of Harold and Dorothy's manipulation, the bank statements showing Harold's forgery and theft, the emails revealing their conspiracy to challenge the will, and finally, the recorded conversation about having Grandma Evelyn declared incompetent. As the recording played in the courtroom, Harold and Dorothy's own voices filled the space, discussing their plans to steal an elderly woman's autonomy and independence. The contrast between their testimony claiming love and concern for Evelyn and their recorded conversation planning her exploitation was devastating. Jonathan Blackwell objected frantically, but the evidence was authentic and legally obtained. Elena had done her homework, ensuring that every piece of evidence would be admissible in court. The most dramatic moment came when Elena called Mrs. Henderson to testify about finding the lockbox and about conversations she had overheard between Harold and Dorothy during their visits to Grandma Evelyn's house. Mrs. Henderson, who had been part of the household for 15 years, testified that she had never seen any signs of cognitive decline in Grandma Evelyn and had, in fact, witnessed Harold and Dorothy making increasingly aggressive demands for money and information about the will. By the time Elena finished presenting our evidence, the courtroom atmosphere had completely shifted. Harold and Dorothy went from confident plaintiffs to exposed criminals facing potential prosecution. Timothy slumped in his seat, realizing that his computer manipulations and social media campaigns had been documented and would likely result in additional charges. Linda, who had been sitting in the gallery waiting to be recalled, quietly left the courthouse during a recess, undoubtedly realizing that her perjury was about to be exposed and prosecuted. Judge Williams called for a brief recess to review the evidence, but when court resumed, her decision was swift and decisive. Not only did she uphold Grandma Evelyn's will in its entirety, but she also ordered Harold and Dorothy to pay restitution for the money Harold had stolen, plus damages for the emotional distress they had caused me through their fraudulent legal action. More importantly, she referred the matter to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution of fraud, perjury, and conspiracy charges. As the judge read her decision, I watched my parents' faces transform from shock to rage to the dawning realization that their lives as they had known them were over. They had gambled everything on their ability to steal my inheritance, and they had lost spectacularly. But the most satisfying moment came when Judge Williams addressed their discrimination directly. This court finds particularly disturbing the plaintiff's attempt to use their daughter's sexual orientation as evidence of unfitness to inherit. Such prejudice has no place in American law and reveals more about the plaintiff's character than it does about the defendant's worthiness. As we left the courthouse that day, Elena put her hand on my shoulder. "Your grandmother would be proud," she said simply. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly free. 6 months after that pivotal court hearing, I'm sitting in what is now my office in the Ashford Building, the downtown property that anchors Grandma Evelyn's real estate empire. The view from the 32nd floor overlooks the city where I was born, where I was nearly destroyed, and where I ultimately found the strength to fight back and win. The aftermath of the trial moved swiftly. Harold was sentenced to 3 years in prison for fraud and forgery, while Dorothy received 2 years for conspiracy and perjury. Their sentences were enhanced because the crimes targeted a vulnerable elderly person, and the judge made it clear that their scheme represented a particularly cruel form of family exploitation. Timothy, as a first-time offender whose role was primarily technological manipulation, received probation and community service. However, his reputation was so thoroughly destroyed by the revelation of his schemes that he was forced to move to another state to find work. The last I heard, he was living with distant relatives in Oregon, working in a restaurant kitchen and staying off social media entirely. Linda Martinez faced charges for perjury and accepting payment for false testimony. She ultimately plea bargained down to a misdemeanor and probation in exchange for cooperating with prosecutors, but her nursing license was suspended and her career effectively ended. More than once, I felt a twinge of sympathy for her situation, remembering our years of genuine friendship before greed destroyed everything between us. The financial restitution was substantial. Harold was ordered to repay the $30,000 he had stolen from Grandma Evelyn, plus interest and penalties that brought the total to nearly $50,000. Dorothy had to return the $25,000 she had paid Linda, plus additional damages for the emotional distress their campaign had caused me. Combined with the money we recovered from other bribed witnesses, the restitution helped offset the legal costs and compensated for some of the income I'd lost during their campaign of destruction. But the money was never really the point. What mattered was that justice was served and that Grandma Evelyn's true wishes were honored. The business empire she had built over decades of hard work and smart investments wasn't going to be carved up and sold off by people who saw it only as a source of quick cash. Running Ashford Properties has been the most challenging and rewarding experience of my life. Grandma Evelyn's business model was sophisticated, involving commercial real estate, residential developments, and strategic investments that required constant attention and analysis. I had to learn quickly, relying on the management team she had assembled while gradually putting my own stamp on the company's direction. The first major decision I made was to establish the Evelyn Ashford Foundation, a non-profit organization that provides legal assistance to families dealing with elder abuse and inheritance fraud. Using a portion of the estate's annual profits, the foundation has already helped dozens of people fight back against relatives who tried to exploit their trust and steal their assets. The foundation also funds educational programs about recognizing and preventing elder abuse, because I learned firsthand how sophisticated these schemes can become. Harold and Dorothy's campaign wasn't just about forging a few documents. It was a comprehensive assault on reality itself, designed to make everyone question my memory, my motives, and my mental state. One of our most successful programs pairs elderly individuals with young advocates who help them understand their legal rights and protect their autonomy. I think Grandma Evelyn would have loved seeing her legacy used to empower other people to maintain control over their own lives and decisions. On a personal level, the ordeal fundamentally changed how I think about family and relationships. I learned that the people who share your DNA aren't necessarily the people who will support you when life gets difficult. Real family is chosen, built through years of mutual respect, trust, and genuine care for each other's well-being. I found that real family with Cassandra Wilson, whom I met at a support group for people dealing with family estrangement. Cassandra had been cut off from her relatives after coming out as transgender, and she understood the pain of having people you love reject the person you really are. Our relationship developed slowly, built on honest communication and shared experiences rather than assumptions about loyalty or obligation. Last month, Cassandra and I got engaged. The proposal happened in Grandma Evelyn's garden, which I've maintained exactly as she left it, filled with the roses and lavender she loved so much. I know Grandma would have adored Cassandra's intelligence, her strength, and her ability to see through people's facades to their true character. More importantly, I know she would have been proud that I learned to choose love over fear, authenticity over acceptance. The legal resolution also brought unexpected closure with some relationships I had written off as lost forever. Several former friends and colleagues reached out after learning the truth about my parents' campaign, apologizing for their assumptions and expressing horror at how thoroughly they had been deceived. I was able to forgive most of them, understanding that Harold and Dorothy had been very convincing in their portrayal of a family in crisis dealing with a daughter's breakdown. My former supervisor Janet Morrison was among those who reached out, offering me consulting work and eventually a partnership position at her firm. I should have trusted my instincts about your character instead of believing what your father told us, she admitted. You were one of our most talented employees, and I let fear and uncertainty override what I knew to be true about you. However, not all relationships could be repaired. Some people remained convinced that I had somehow orchestrated this entire situation for sympathy or financial gain. A few former friends suggested that I was lucky my parents had turned out to be criminals because it validated my side of the story. These responses taught me that some people are more comfortable believing in conspiracy theories than accepting the uncomfortable truth that nice, normal-seeming people can be capable of extraordinary cruelty. The most profound lesson I learned was about the nature of resilience. For months, I believed I was weak because I had been blindsided by my family's betrayal. I thought my trust and naivety had made me an easy target. But surviving their assault required a kind of strength I didn't know I possessed. It took courage to stand in that courthouse and face people who had raised me, knowing I was about to destroy their lives as thoroughly as they had tried to destroy mine. It took determination to rebuild my career and reputation from nothing, knowing that whispers and doubts would follow me for years. Most of all, it took wisdom to forgive myself for the years I had spent loving people who were incapable of loving me back. Today, as I look out over the city from Grandma Evelyn's office, which is now mine, I feel a peace I never experienced during all those years of trying to earn my parents' approval. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing work that honors someone who truly loved me, surrounded by people who value my authentic self rather than some performance they expect me to maintain. The Ashford Properties empire is thriving under my leadership, expanding into sustainable development and affordable housing projects that serve the community rather than just extracting profit from it. Every decision I make is guided by the question of what Grandma Evelyn would have done, but filtered through my own values and vision for the future. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how everything unfolded, if I wish I could have maintained relationships with my biological family despite their flaws. The answer is always no. The people who tried to steal my inheritance taught me the most valuable lesson of all. That authentic love and chosen family are infinitely more precious than obligation and biological connection. Grandma Evelyn's real legacy wasn't the $10 million or the business empire. It was the example she set of living with integrity, making choices based on love rather than fear, and having the courage to protect what matters most even when it costs you relationships with people you had hoped to trust. So let me ask you, Have you ever faced a situation where people you trusted turned against you? How did you find the strength to keep fighting when everything seemed impossible? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below because your experiences might help someone else who's going through their own battle right now. If this story touched your heart or taught you something about resilience and family, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and finding your true family. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they're stronger than they know and that justice really can prevail, even when the odds seem impossible. Thank you for taking this journey with me, for listening to my story, and for believing that love and truth are more powerful than greed and deception. Whatever battles you're facing in your own life, remember that you have the strength to survive them and the wisdom to build something beautiful from the ashes. Until next time, keep fighting for what's right, keep choosing love over fear, and never forget that your authentic self is worth protecting, no matter what it costs you.